Good morning. Actually, I think it's good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm out on the West Coast, so it's still 11 o'clock for me. So I'll say morning, but I know it's also good afternoon to many of you. Thank you so much for choosing to spend the next hour with us. We're going to give it another maybe minute or two as folks continue to trickle in. To anyone just joining, good morning or afternoon, no matter where you're at. Thank you for joining us. We are going to start at 11:02 just to give everyone a chance to get in here and find their way in. All right, and with that, I am going to kick us off. Thank you all so much for choosing to spend the next hour with us. My name is Katie Byron, and I'm here in Washington State, and I am joined today by my colleague and good friend, Sharonda Sullivanoff, and we will be introducing ourselves in just a moment, but just wanted to do a couple housekeeping items ahead of time. So for those of you who are wondering, are you going to have access to the PowerPoint slides later? The answer is absolutely yes. They will be uploaded later today, so don't worry about crazy taking notes and stuff. It'll all be there for you to access. We will also be sharing our emails at the end of the presentation and would absolutely love to hear from you. Particularly as you drop questions in the chat, we're going to have some time for Q&A, but if we don't get to your question or you wanted to explore something we said further, please feel free to reach out via email. And as I said, we are going to have you just drop your questions in the chat while we are doing the presentation, and then we will get to them at the end. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us. We are so excited to be here today. A brief bit about our agenda. First, we're going to introduce the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership. We're going to kind of help you understand why our relationship is so critical and important in child welfare. What are the benefits of birth and foster parent partnerships, and how do we overcome barriers and find solutions? Finally, we'll leave you today with some resources and then end with a question and answer period. Throughout the presentation, we're also going to talk about some of our own experiences and some pearls of wisdom that we have learned over the years. So like I said a minute ago, my name is Katie Byron. I'm a caregiver and adoptive parent here in Washington State. I became passionate about birth and foster parent partnerships kind of through a personal journey over the last 15 years. When I first became a licensed caregiver 15 years ago, I really wasn't bought into the idea of parent and caregiver partnerships, in a large part because of my own personal fears and biases. But as I became entrenched in child welfare, I began to see that the harm of the lack of partnership or relationship was causing to everyone involved, parents, caregivers, and children. I had worked with parents who did not know where their children were, if they are safe, or if they knew that their parents loved them. And as a caregiver, I realized I could not care for the child's whole self if I didn't know their family, where they had come from, or who their people were. I saw how there was so much animosity, distrust, and adversity built up when parents and caregivers were not working in partnership together. And conversely, I saw how much easier it was on everyone when there was a positive partnership. When I observed and personally experienced what it felt like when everyone was working together, I became empowered to help others build and develop these partnerships. And that's kind of what is bringing me here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sharonda.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm delighted to be here with everyone who has decided to join this amazing presentation today. My name is Sharonda Sullivanoff. I am a parent with lived experience, which essentially means that I have navigated the child welfare system. And I am also a kinship caregiver, and I've cared for my grandson since birth. And that is why I'm actually here today in the presenting on the birth and foster parent partnership. Because when I got my grandson, I needed some help if I was going to be successful in caring for him. And so I actually partnered with a foster parent who was wanting to adopt. I wasn't sure if I was going to keep him permanently. And there we forged a relationship based on transparency on what our agendas were. And what happened is that my family has gotten very big. My grandson has been with me permanently, and we were able to build a community to help him and myself thrive in the middle of uncertainty and just have a really fantastic experience. So I wanted to share that with as many people as possible, because I know that community is what sustains us and builds us, particularly in times of uncertainty. So that's my kind of story of why I'm here. My job actually currently is the Director of Public Policy at Children's Home Society, and we are really geared at uprooting injustices and really creating a new culture. And so I really want to be a part of creating a culture of support, of moving us away from separating and helping us to figure out ways to be innovative and creative in building really strong communities and building really strong families. So that is why I'm here today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Well, thank you so much, Sharonda. Now I'd like you to meet the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership. The Birth and Foster Parent Partnership is a growing movement of birth, foster, and kinship caregivers who are working together to make improvements in policies and practices, much like Sharonda just said, and change the systems and cultures around the foster care system. The overall goal is to help families become reunified whenever possible, and ultimately to prevent children and families from entering the system at all. This movement really grew because of the BFPP, is how we abbreviate it, their hard work, their commitment to strengthening families and keeping children together and connected to their families. The BFPP met many times to help identify core practices and policies that would support these strong relationships between birth and foster parents. The BFPP reviewed the research and gathered input from birth and resource parents and staff about what works and what's been tried and didn't work. And all of this led us to the idea of developing 2 new tools to help promote the importance of birth and foster parent relationships all across the country. The hope is to begin shifting attitudes and practices of child welfare leaders and practitioners, other system leaders, foster parents, birth parents, and kinship caregivers. Sharonda will be talking about these tools later in the presentation. We'll be dropping the link to the tools. They are available and free of use to everyone in the chat. But now we're going to take a moment and introduce the partners who have partnered with the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership. And it was formed by 3 national organizations 5 years ago. The first is the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, which is a national membership organization that supports children's trust funds in their statewide efforts to strengthen families, prevent child abuse and neglect. The second is the Youth Law Center and the Quality Parenting Initiative. And QPI, we love our abbreviations, is a process to strengthen foster care and improve permanency and well-being for children. And the third is Casey Family Programs, which is a national operating foundation that is focused on preventing the need for foster care. These 3 organizations all work in partnership to support the important work of the BFPP. So now let's take just a moment and talk about language. So the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership formed in 2016. And in that time, there has been a lot of discussion about the terms we use and the importance and the power of words. And so language is so important in what we do, but then we also need to realize that language is evolving, and terms that we used in 2016 may not be the terms that we're using today. And then also across the country, you'll hear foster parent, resource parent, caregiver. It's kind of all over the map. And so we need to recognize that different communities use various terms, and that we really, the key is to listen to people with lived experience and ask them what term they prefer. But we also need to keep in the back of our head the power and the potential impact of our language, and just be cognizant of that as we develop new tools and strategies. So now this is going to be a review for some of you, and for others of you, it might be new. So for those of you that it's a review, hang in there with me, because this is really critical to helping form the foundation of why relationships are so important and why we should put in the work and do the work to build partnerships between parents and foster parents. So when we remove children from parents, we cause trauma. We cause what's called an ACE, which is an adverse childhood experience. Research has shown that children coming into care have an average of 3 to 4 ACEs. And the research has shown this is primarily from living in a dysfunctional home, perhaps parents with mental health concerns, they're leaving care with 6 to 8 ACEs, and that being placed into foster care does not stop the accrual of ACEs. And so ACEs can really be a tolerable stress when a child has a parent or other caring adult that is kind of providing a buffer to that stress. But the stress response turns toxic when the challenging situation doesn't end, when there's no adult to help a child process what they've been through. And when the stress response stays active too long, it hurts our body and our brain. And so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the differences in stress activation and how stress, because it's there for all of us, is either going to lead to resilience or vulnerability. So let's imagine for a minute, one of our children in our home has a big soccer game. Perhaps it's the championship, the accumulation of a hard season. And this is stressful. The kid is stressed, the parents by nature are stressed, but this stress, we know what it looks like. It's a soccer game. It's not life-threatening. No one will lose their life, win or lose. It's a moderate amount of stress, and we know it will end. It's going to be a 90-minute soccer game, and then it will be, the end is controlled no matter what happens. So this is a tolerable amount of stress and teaches our children to be resilient, to adapt to stressors in life, to cope with them, to meet them head on, and then to also cope with the outcome, whether it's winning the big game or a crushing loss. But regardless of the outcome of predictable stress, most of the child's existence and relationships will stay the same. The child's going to go home to the same home that night, have the same friends, same family members are around them, school, pets, regular activities have all remained stable. And so this type of stress activation, where it can be really intense and all-consuming for a period of time, those 90 minutes of playing soccer, it really builds resiliency. It, like I said, teaches kids to cope, to navigate difficult situations, because the stressor is finite and limited. And now I'm going to invite everyone to think back to the beginning of the pandemic. While there was some information coming out in January 2020 of a virus that was happening in another part of the world, I'll bet many of you were shocked when the world began shutting down. Suddenly, our lives were flipped upside down. Stores, businesses, and workplaces were shut down suddenly. Our children's schools closed. Activities that we had never given a second thought to, like gathering with friends for a barbecue, became dangerous, and we were told to avoid them at all costs. Suddenly, going into stores required planning, a mask, hand sanitizer, and for a time, these items were very scarce. For the most part, we didn't see this coming. We weren't entirely sure what was happening. There wasn't a roadmap on how to navigate it, how to support our families, how to support our kids, how to support ourselves. At the beginning, we believed these changes were only for a short time. I remember when my children first, their school closed, it was for 2 weeks, and then it was 4 weeks, and then 6 weeks. But then it really became quickly apparent that the world that we had navigated through prior to March 2020 was gone. And we had, and I would argue still don't, know when it will end. It's extreme. It's prolonged, and many of us have become sensitized to this stress. How many of us are feeling stressed on a daily basis? How many of us sometimes things are feeling really out of control? Kids may be struggling. Are you yourself coping with decision fatigue and the continual onslaught of bad news? This is unpredictable stress. This is the stress that over time can become toxic to us. And so let's think about all this, the unpredictable stress, also in the frame of foster care. So the child may not have seen removal coming, most likely. It happens all of a sudden, you're going along, and then all of a sudden the world is changed. The world as you knew it, your bubble that was around you that was familiar is gone. It's prolonged. Kids don't know. We don't have an answer in foster care of when you're going to go home. And this prolonged, ambiguous nature of unpredictable stress is really going to lead to vulnerability. We are almost living in our reptile part of our brain, which is fight, flight, or flee. And when that is activated, it's much, much harder for us to engage, say, in school activities or cope with other stressors that are being piled on. And so that's kind of the difference between the patterns of stress activation and how foster care often falls under the unpredictable form of stress. And so now that I've given you all the bad news and brought you back to the beginning of the pandemic and all sorts of things, I'm going to give you the good news. So and if we could go to the next slide, that'd be awesome. About diversity in relational health. They have the power to counterbalance the adversity. And as the adversity in your life or the life of a child increases, the relational health must increase to buffer the child and avoid developmental and global problems, health problems. I see a couple people are saying that my sound is breaking up. I live in a rural community and once in a while it gets a little choppy. So I'm fingers crossed it comes back. So again, let's think about the pandemic. As the world around us changed overnight, the importance of relational health came to the forefront. We couldn't share physical space with our loved ones. And so we became creative as we craved that connection, as we were drawn to connect with our fellow human beings. And for many of us, Zoom became a part of our everyday vernacular. There were Zoom game nights, school meetings, 4-H meetings, all these became happening over Zoom. Our work meetings all went to Zoom. Today we're at a conference on Zoom. And so this became our norm as we struggled to maintain these connections. We recognized the importance of these connections as we really struggled through the uncertainty of the pandemic. And for kids and families experiencing the child welfare system, this connectedness is essential for counterbalancing the adversity and trauma related to removal, related to placement out of home, related to placement with strangers, away from your parents, oftentimes away from your siblings, away from your pets, your teachers, your community. And so for these reasons, it is absolutely critical that those of us working in child welfare prioritize and support these relationships. Parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, and another critical relationship that we're here to talk about today is the relationship between the parent and the caregiver. Because when a child sees the parent and whoever is caring for them, whether it be a kinship caregiver, a suitable other, or a licensed foster placement, when a child can see them partnering together to provide stability to that child, that helps the toxic stress reduce a little bit more for that child. And then it helps the child get through this very unpredictable period. And with that, I am going to toss it over to Sharonda, who hopefully has a much better internet connection, and she's going to take it from here.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. Taking us back to the pandemic. Oh my gosh, I can only just go back to a state of self-reflection. And without my foster parent, I have to tell you, I don't know if we would have made it. So the benefits of connection far outweigh anything that we can even imagine. And as life unveils itself, we'll definitely recognize and understand why it's so important. I'm going to actually go into a little bit about the benefits of connection. And what we know is that building relationships with foster parents and kinship caregivers, that having a bunch of caring adults involved in a child's life has the opportunity to work together and best support them and each other. These are new relationships, and they may actually produce lifelong, meaningful relationships for children and families. Just to once again go a little bit into my own story, the foster family that I am connected with has a child that they actually adopted, and she's become almost a daughter or a sibling of sorts into my household. And so you know, I see our family, as I said early on, expanding and creating these opportunities to really build and strengthen each other. And it's one more woman, woman of color, because a child's a child of color, in her life, a part of her community, and building up her community and building and bringing new folks into their lives. So it's so important to build and create those opportunities for connections. Connections also build a sense of safety and support network of adults around the children. Relationships will help eliminate the fear of the unknown for the parents. Not knowing who is caring for your child can create a level of anxiety that is paralyzing. And I know we can all identify with the idea of not knowing where your child is and who your child is with. And the state's requirement for a parent to engage in services, the ability to know what's happening or where your child is, creates a space so that you can get activated and move towards back to your child. In the best scenarios for the kids to see caregivers and birth parents working together. I mean, talk about great role modeling and having children take those skills forward with them. Building strong relationships which last long after the children have been returned home and the dependency case is closed eliminates the trauma that sometimes comes from removing children from good caregivers. I want to just really emphasize that point of, you know, children fall in love with caregivers. And the more that we build these relationships, we are reducing the likelihood of another relationship being severed, but that we have this communication and continuation of being together. And so we're really doing this for children. And lastly, in building the benefits of connection, learning about and getting to know each other can remove bias and stigma around the perception about who we think people are. It's so important that we actually get to know someone rather than read about someone. I want to just emphasize that, you know, in child welfare, it's an investigative agency. It doesn't necessarily look for the good. It's building a case. It's important for us to take the time to really understand and want to get to know someone. And so that's also the benefits of connection, that you're not just reading a story, but you're actually hearing from me and knowing what my life is and maybe the contributing factors. Some of them may have been in my control. Some of them may not have been in my control. But the opportunity to really learn and grow from each other has to come from communication and has to come from connection. So we're talking about connecting with people, and all of a sudden we know that there are some barriers in finding solutions. I would be remiss not to mention that that incredible cute kid there is my grandson, and you can barely see her, but that's his foster mother that has helped incredibly. And so as we encounter this time, what I can tell you is that most barriers are just fear-based. And that we know that most of our fears are universal. And so your fear is my fear. And I believe it's so advantageous for us to just reduce it down to what it actually is. And most of it is thoughts or beliefs that I have brought into my own mind. And that the more that I'm able to communicate and have this relationship, it actually reduces those. So I always say, let us move towards love and compassion and let that be our leader in this work. Fear really disconnects us. And if we stay there, we're not really willing to work through that. And so, like I said, I'm such a cheerleader for, you know, exposing, talking about it, walking through it, getting through the other side of it. This isn't about perfection. This is about people that are willing to just have those organic conversations, learning and growing with one another. It changes lives and it transforms lives. And so there will be barriers, there will be complications, but more importantly, what there always is there's always a solution if we're willing to look for it. There's lots of ways, you know, we think about what are the things that possibly get in the way. I want to say, how do I get things out of my way? And so once again, I just, you know, I think intention is absolute. If we remain very shared values of reunification, and if not reunification, maintaining those relationships, a lot of those barriers that can actually be overcome. So the next slide, we've talked a lot about the building of relationships, but now we were talking about these tools, because nothing's like being asked to do something and I need a guide, but I want to just say that this is a guide, and that, you know, when you meet a stranger, you know, you come across this person, you get to learn about them, you ask inquisitive questions, and this, you know, presents you with some opportunities or some starting points. But I also say bring your authentic self and let that be also your guide in all of this. So what we've done is we've developed these tools. These tools have consistently focused on promoting lasting relationships between the birth and foster families and kinship caregivers to support families and to help to build the child welfare system to improve their practice in supporting birth and foster parent relationships. The current culture in some jurisdictions may be that those relationships be discouraged, but I just want to say it is important for us to challenge that and to encourage the system to do better, for it to recognize that relationships and connection are essential, and that the management from the system itself is not necessary in a large percentage of respects. People have really good sense, and the managing of relationships, I don't know necessarily if that's the business, as much as the safety of children is the business of the system. And so I really encourage us to challenge our system leaders to really look at the benefits and the necessity of really building those connections. These resources really have worked hard to create 2 complementary tools to assist in promoting the shift in the attitudes and practice. These tools were created and for families. We, as a group, came together. So this is a co-creation documents that are with people with lived experience. Each page has that woven throughout, sharing what works, and when challenges occur, as we know that they definitely will, then what are some of the next steps? The relationship guide is the most useful for birth and foster parents and kinship caregivers working to build and sustain relationships and work towards reunification. And I want to just say, you know, the importance of the shared goal. If the shared goal is reunification, right there, we have leveled the playing field, and that creating that connection already has been cemented. So it's so important to have an acknowledgement of where we're trying to get to. And then we have a state and local leaders guide to building strong policy and practice foundation, which is most important, useful for the staff and the administrators, because as we said earlier, we want to help to shift the culture of the system itself. We want to help them to see that the supports and that creating strong relationships strengthens families, strengthens communities, and strengthens us all. And we also created an executive summary that provides a brief overview of the BFPP and these 2 new tools. This is in the middle of the document, and you will see this. So also, when you came into the presentation today, these tools are in an electronic file. So when you came in there, it says file, please click on, and if you're interested in getting the electronic versions of these are readily available. And I encourage you to bring those into your jurisdiction and to start the conversation, moving us forward. Next slide. So the relationship has actually 4 building topics. And the first build topic is actually building the relationship. So we're starting from the ground up. And this is when the child first enters into care. How do we actually support a smooth transition? What are the types of questions that need to be answered? And what are the types of questions that need to be asked? How do we actually keep routines and traditions going for the child? There are a few strategies that already been explored. 2 specific examples are those comfort calls and in-person family introductory meetings. I want to just give a shout out to Katie, who's also my co-facilitator or co-presenter on this. She started a fantastic program here called Family Connections. It brings foster family and a birth family together. Each one of them has a liaison to work with. And this introduction is that they don't have to meet without some other type of support, but that they have a guide and a mentor, that the importance of the relationship. I also want to just emphasize that, you know, as Katie had already talked about earlier, that through COVID, we've learned a lot. And what we've learned more than anything is, and I'll just speak for myself, was my aversion to technology. And then at some point, my dependence and reliance on it. And what I can tell you is I get a lot of comfort seeing faces on screens today. And there are so many different ways for us to just mitigate, concerns. We can build those relationships over technology. We can build those relationships over the phone. We can build those relationships through writing. There's so many different ways for us to stay connected. So that's one of the building places, and there's lots of suggestions in the guide. The next area in the guide is supporting the relationship. So we want to really deepen that relationship. We've started, we've got this connection, we're talking with each other. The parent is building some trust and also probably taking care of their own issues in business. So there's a delicate dance there, and there's probably some room for some grace. I call it, grace and space while people are learning and growing in their process. We have a list of suggestions on the best ways to talk with foster parents. And as I said, texting and sending photos, short videos. I can't tell you how much I just enjoy watching the same video of my grandson over and over and over again, and he actually lives in my house. So, I mean, there's just so much that we get from just these small little acts that really have a really big impact. The fourth area is let's talk about keeping that relationship strong while working with the system and planning for reunification. I want to just tell you, this isn't just about the children. This is about all of us. This is about you. This is about me. This is about community. And we want to build these relationships so that as the case progresses one way or the other, that we have created something that feels supportive, and that as families start to enter into this next place of unknown with a little bit of trepidation and probably some fear of feeling like they're walking on hands and pins and needles, that they've got these strong relationships that have been built on trust and they've been maintained over the time. And lastly, I want to just talk about keeping the relationship strong after the birth family leaves the system. Trauma is real. We want to not re-traumatize children. We know that when they are with caregivers, that they form these loving, beautiful relationships. And we want to encourage to keep all of those things going. It's so important for children to know that, adversity can come in life, and that through adversity, there is triumph. I always say tragedy and triumph run hand in hand together, and triumph is always on the other side. And so how do we keep those relationships strong and let children know that, we are here for them? I have a really good friend of mine that says something to the effect of, there's nothing wrong with having as many people in your child's life that love them. And this is just one of the pathways that we were able to acquire these folks. So that is fantastic. In addition to the full guide that includes charts on each of these 4 topics, the BFFPP has provided you with 4 discussion charts as separate documents to use. Each chart highlights a relationship guide, a topic area, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the individual charts. But these guides are really important tools, but we need your help to use them. And so I encourage you to please go and take a look after the presentation and see about these guides and see how you can bring these into the discussion over in your jurisdiction. I believe that is my spiel, and I think we're going to open it up. We're running a little bit early, but that's okay. And we're going to open it up to some questions, and I hope that you guys will dig deep and utilize myself and Katie as guides in this new place that we're all embarking on together.
And while people are putting some questions in the chat, I wanted to share a story of the difference that these relationships can make. So I was helping out with a situation where a child who had been in care since birth, so about 3 years, was returning home to a parent who had done the work, who was very ready to take care of the child. We actually had one of the connections meetings that Sharonda talked about, and had a moment where the foster parent and the parent could sit down and they really sat together and planned a thoughtful transition for this little one. And so traditionally, transitions can be very abrupt. It can be, you know, the child is going to return home on this day, the social worker will pick them up. And as a caregiver, that may be the very last contact you ever have with that child. And that's hard. It's hard. It stays with you. It's hard to do much when you don't know, how is the child doing? Do they know their bedtime routine? So anyway, this foster parent and parent met in advance of the transition, and the foster parents were able to prepare this parent to successfully parent their child. I remember one of the so simple things, but things that made such a big difference, is they told the parent, this little one really loves blueberries. Like, blueberries are her love language. Fresh blueberries are the way to her heart. And so they said, you know what we have found? If you have some fresh blueberries in your fridge, and when she comes home, if she's having, you know, a toddler meltdown, lots of transitions for this little one to get through, if you put out a little bowl of blueberries and then put on this favorite show, that has helped her in the past. And the parent was so grateful, because this gave them tools to ease that transition on their side, instead of that other scenario I talked about, where the child is just returned to the parent, and maybe in a good case, there is a little note describing some of the child's routines, but in reality, there's no real communication. This parent was set up to successfully care for their child, and to be able to put some things in place ahead of time to help ease that transition for everyone. And so that's just one of many stories. Another one I can think of that just happened recently is a child had been out of home. Parents did not know who the child was being cared for. Child was undergoing a transition in placements, and we had what's called a connections meeting because of the transition. And this was just a great meeting. So connections meetings are facilitated by parent allies, who are parents who have been there, like Sharonda, and are now supporting others, and then a caregiver mentor who's has experience building these relationships. And these caregivers came in open. Parents were super excited to finally know who was going to be caring for their child, and be able to tell this caregiver all the exciting things about their child and what they loved about their little one. And because of kind of the supports put in place, and because they were being encouraged to build this relationship, they on their own came up with a plan for parents to be included at medical appointments. Parents hadn't previously been able to attend. The caregiver was able to explain, oh, it's because of COVID, we're only allowed one caregiver in the room. Would it be okay if we just Zoom with you guys? And the parents were thrilled. Yes, please, please. We want to be a part of medical appointments. We want to be there. We want to know what's going on. I can't tell you how many times that was said. We want to know what's going on with our child. And so after this meeting, these folks left with a way for parents to attend medical appointments, a plan for future communication, a plan to have the parents Zoom call the foster parents 3 nights a week and read a bedtime story. And so that's the power of relationship building. And when we let these relationships happen, when we encourage them to happen, acknowledging that we can all think of a worst case scenario, absolutely, we can get there. But if we only focus on the worst case, how many beautiful other stories are not happening?
I'm going to just piggyback a little bit off of that, because I want to just share a different angle from this, because of course I come in this as a kinship caregiver, and I want to just tell you, I couldn't be a kinship caregiver without a foster parent. The amount of support and willingness to walk through this journey with me and with my grandson has been absolutely priceless. As we talk about building relationships, we're talking about building communities around children. And there is not one way for this to occur. There's a lot of different ways for it not to occur, but there's not one way for it to actually occur. And the more that we remain open to really building something that matters and is meaningful and impactful for families, the more likely we are doing something amazing for children. Recently, I had this experience with my grandson, and statistics are really boring, but they're also very informative. And what we know is about over 80% of children that are adopted actually seek.
Geez, mom, birth mom. She may be in a position to help him. And he may be.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. I lost my train of thought. What I was thinking about was my grandson. So what we know is about 80% of families or children that are actually adopted actually seek their birth parents somewhere along the lines. And recently I had this really just fascinating experience with my grandson, who's 3.5 years old. And I know, I'm his caregiver, so I know his life very intimately. And he hasn't really seen his mother very much. But what was very, very peculiar and very intriguing and telling is his mom came, and maybe he's seen his mom maybe 10 times. And he looked at me because I was, checking on them, and he said, "Grandma, I want to be with my mom." And it was such a telling moment for me. Like, it doesn't matter that he's, loved incredibly. It doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but, as far as like what's important to him, like that connection, that desire, and that bond is instinctual. And without the foster parent who was willing to shift the way that she showed up in this, could he have maintained those type of relationships throughout his lifetime? I don't know. I'm not I don't have a crystal ball or anything, but I just think it's so important for us to continue to open up as many ways possible for families to overcome whatever challenges and barriers they're going through with each other. And I am so grateful to foster parents that are willing to come into this. And in our shifting of the culture that we're headed towards, it's really about building each other and building our children. And so I invite all of us to continue this conversation and looking at the ways on how to support families that find themselves embroiled with the child welfare system. So it looks like I'm not quite sure what we've got for questions here, but I wanted to also just share that story from my angle and my life experience that I'm watching unfold.
I think it's also really important to acknowledge, with all the successful, awesome stories, these are human relationships. And to come into this relationship with a view that the relationship must go well, everybody must show up in a friendly, kind, wonderful, authentic manner, we must be grateful to each other, sets us up for failure very soon, because human relationships are messy. And when you add in foster care, it's a whole lot messier. And so if people come into these relationships, parents, caregivers, with a realistic expectation that this is going to take work, like this is a relationship like any other relationship in my life, and I can't put expectations on this relationship or on that person that aren't realistic. And so sometimes I encourage folks to think about it like an in-law. So when you get married, you have an in-law. You don't pick them. You don't have a say in who they are. They may not be someone you would choose to hang out with on a regular basis, given the choice, but you both love the same person. And so you figure it out. There may be topics that don't get discussed at Thanksgiving ever, ever, ever. It may be giving grace for things that are done differently and just moving past that. But just like all relationships, there's going to be ups and downs. And so what we don't want people is to come in and be like, okay, I will have a relationship as long as this child's mom is thankful for me taking care of them, expresses gratitude, meets me here, 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 and here. That's that's not reasonable. So just go in with an open heart and, like Sharonda said, grace and space, and realizing that a parent whose child may have just been removed may not be extremely grateful, might be having a lot of anger, a lot of grief, and that might come out at the caregiver who's reaching forth. And so it's all just about building little steps of a bridge, putting it out there so that when that person is ready, they turn around and they don't have a crevasse to cross. They have one step to take, and there's the bridge.
It does look like, it's not really a question, but there is a comment that says, and I'm going to suggest to one of my bio moms to ask about Zoom for her daughter who is in foster care, and especially for doctor's appointments. I want to just say, I so encourage that. COVID's taught us a lot. And what it's taught us is that, well, I mean, the list goes on and on. One of the things it's taught us is we can adapt. And we get pretty creative in making business happen in the confines of technology, and it's actually really useful. And so, I also encourage, as we start to have those conversations and get innovative on how do we keep connection, inviting the social worker to utilize their resources. We don't want to create challenges and barriers for families that are already, experiencing hardship and, probably pretty stressed out with just the navigation of child welfare. So, assuring that they have, the technology, the minutes, the bandwidth, all of those things necessary to show up in that way, because what we don't want to do is present the idea and then that there's a whole other list of barriers for it not to be executed. And that takes, some deliberation on our part. What I like about what Katie's talking about is that this isn't easy, but it's necessary. And what I have learned in my lifetime thus far on life is that the easiest path, or the path of least resistance, never really actually offers me the joy of the harder traveled terrain. And on that harder traveled terrain, somewhere in those peaks and valleys, because they're all along the way, is where I discovered joy. It's never in the places of the least resistance, but the places where I've had to really, institute a whole new set of skills, find some things I've never even known before about myself. I wanted to say, when I took my grandson, I was a full-time student and a full-time worker with a child with special needs. And if I could express the amount of work that meant, and I'm so happy I said yes. I'm so happy I said yes. Like, the joy, the frustration, the exhaustion is all worth it. It's all worth it. So, I mean, I encourage you to please bring your best self, drink lots of water, get lots of rest if you can, because this journey requires us to continuously get up and drag ourselves, even when days seem, pretty difficult. And the last thing I'll just say is, as a parent that's navigated child welfare, I had issues, right? I mean, you see a refined, amazing person here today, but I got to promise you, 10 years ago, no way, that's not who you saw. And what developed me into who you see today is how people poured into me. And I always say they loved me through my ugly. And that's a powerful change agent, is watching people at their worst and you still showing up at your best. And that's how we transform and do things that are incredible in people's lives. So I encourage you to know that the work is there, but the work is worth it. And that is why we're so here. I see a really long question here. So it says 2 questions. Will you recommend the same resources for a parent who had rights terminated 6 years ago when they were younger, and now parents are in the position to have and want a relationship back with their child they lost and don't feel comfortable approaching this option out of guilt, but they want to? Well, I'll take a stab at this, and I'll just say, first of all, this is about all of us. And guilt is a monster that I try to reduce down to, because that's really some shame. in there. And if we're not careful, then, you know, we can get some blame going in there too. And the part about this work is about healing. And I think that there's some fantastic opportunities by helping people to walk through their trepidation and walk through their feelings, and help them to see that, you know, life is not a perfection. It is about the journey of living. And it's not that there's a right or wrong. It's just your willingness to continue to move forward. And so I encourage all relationships, because unless they're incredibly harmful or unsafe, but that, you know, the healing that will come from the parent and for the child can only happen through communication. And it's not the only pathway, because I mean, healing happens a lot of different ways, but it is a really good starting point. So I, of course, would encourage that. I'm going to ask Katie, what do you think?
I love this question, because I do my work both on the front of the spectrum and the end of the spectrum. And so along with Family Connections, I also am intimately involved in exactly what Monica is asking. And so Monica was asking, what are resources on how to start conversations with the current adoptive parents who have a blame approach to the parents, to the bio parents for the children ending up in the system? And I have some tools. Would love to talk about this further if you'd like. I'm going to drop one in the chat right here. And this is a new video that was recently released. It's on the Amara webpage. And so where would I start? I would start with talking about the child's need to be connected, that their child is wondering who their people are, who they're from, and that it is our duty and our obligation as adoptive parents to support that connection for our adoptees. I am also an adoptive parent, so I can really get on a soapbox here, but to form healthy identity as an adult adoptee, children need to know their story. They need to know their self. And so what I would really do is just start the conversations with the current adoptive parents, really focusing on the child. So we know that technology is out there. We know that you can find anything you want on the internet. We know that there is no longer any really such thing as a closed adoption. And some of you might be like, oh, but there's 23andMe, there's Ancestry, and many are believing that the age of closed adoption is ending because the information can be found. And so what I would challenge those adoptive parents to do is to do the work they need to so that they can walk alongside their child with this, so that their child doesn't feel later like they have to do it in secrecy or walk it alone. Like sometimes I'll hear adoptive parents who are like, well, when they're 18, they can go find their parents, their birth parents, if they want to. Well, how scary. None of us at 18 were really ready to take on life. And all of a sudden we had bills or college and blah, yeah. And here, now go forge this new relationship, this complex relationship on your own. No, we want to walk alongside our children and support them as they build these relationships, because let's circle back. They're going to be messy. Human relationships have up and down. So we want to prepare our children and support our children as they engage in these relationships. And you can blame all you want, but in the end, you are still parenting an adoptee and you need to do right by those children. And so the link I'm going to post has a little video. I'd encourage you to share that with them and kind of get the conversation started. One of the people featured in I think it's a 90-second video is an adult adoptee. And it's just really talking about no matter what kind of adoption, international, closed, perhaps the birth parents dead, incarcerated, there is a way to build connection for that child to their first family. And that is what creates a healthy adoptee identity. Sorry for my tangent. I'm going to drop my link now, but give me some more questions.
All right, quiet bunch. I'll just add just one piece on the blame. You know, blame is really a distraction. So we never have to really approach anything, because if it's always someone else's fault, we don't really have to see ourselves as being solutions when life happens. you know, I'd be interested to know, and I know that I can't in this platform, but, you know, child welfare has a lot of root causes, and, you know, we see families at their worst, and we can spend a lot of time, you know, paying attention to that, and not enough time looking at the historical, the systemic context that actually contribute to people finding themselves in systems and then having to navigate that. There's a lot more to the story because there's a lot more to our history as a nation. And so I encourage also to take some time and understand the system a little bit more than just out of child safety. What we know is the types of families that come in are usually people of color and that are impoverished in some way, and that we have a method or a thinking about that. And there's some reckoning around how we approach and address the needs of families. And it really shouldn't ever be in blame. I mean, we're just human beings and there's no good that ever comes out of that. So I really know that blame keeps me in my corner and I never have to come out and talk and be with you. And in building community and in building connection, you know, if that's my North Star, then I have to be willing to come out and do something different. And blame is my way of staying in my corner. So, but I get it. And this is all process, you know, this is all process. Oh, and thank you, Robin, for sharing that piece about yourself in here. And yeah, we always wonder. I've got a test right now where I'm deliberating on if to do it or not, because I also don't know much about my ancestry too, and I wonder, who wouldn't? Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. And, you know, 4 minutes back of your life isn't a bad thing if that's where we're at. So I just want to thank everyone who came and joined us today. I hope that you found this session to be meaningful, and that you will please take a moment, look at those resources, and please bring it into conversations, into your communities. And Katie did not mention, but she does have a fantastic program called Fostering Connection, one foster parent's bold move into changing the system in the way that we connect with one another. And that can be done anywhere. So be those people that are willing to have those bold and brave conversations, be fierce in your advocacy for families, and let's see where we can take this system to a new place.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. And also, Danita just dropped a link in the chat to a short survey. If you could just give us your feedback. We always read it, take it to heart, and use it as we prepare to continue to spread our message of connection and support. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It, as always, Sharonda, was absolutely lovely to present with you. And I thank everyone who joined in, who listened, and maybe we're making new thoughts in your head, ways to do it different.
And I just want to say thank you to the presenters and to everybody joining us. That was awesome and easy on my part. You guys were awesome at moderating your own session. So thank you. And thank you for all the information. It was an awesome topic to sit in on. Have a great day, everyone. Please don't forget to do your survey.